Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the Guitar Underground. I'm Neil Santos, your host, and this week we are talking about quitting guitar. I hate even saying those words. I feel like you can never fail if you never quit. That's one of my main, mottos, I guess, in life. Things I keep coming back to when I'm trying things that are difficult. If you don't quit, you'll never fail, because you can just try again, right? However, everybody that picks up the guitar doesn't always stick with it. And today we're going to talk about 5 reasons why guitar players quit, not in no particular order. And then we're going to talk about 5 reasons that you shouldn't quit. And I think those are very important to keep track of. So, have you ever thought about quitting guitar? I'd like to know. I have. Multiple times. Maybe more than 30. I don't know, like seriously considered, like, what am I doing with my life? Like, what is going on? I'm 38 years in now. I'm 50. I started when I was 12. 38 years into playing, and I've seen a lot of change just in my time over, as far as guitar goes, right? When I started playing, it was all about, hair bands, and the guitarist was the guy, the equal to the singer. And you're in these bands like Zeppelin, right? They started it, and then you have like Van Halen and all the hair bands. And I thought that was so cool. And then it just, grunge came out and changed all that. I mean, grunge is great, but what it did to guitar was, pretty dramatic. All of a sudden, it wasn't cool to put a guitar solo in your song. Or if you did, you wanted it to sound like you were really basically like smashing your neck against the mic stand. Like if it sounded good, that wasn't cool. You know what I mean? It means it didn't have emotion in it or something. And maybe if I made the jump over to country music at the time, I would have found my people. But I didn't. I was like, well, I'm more of a rock guy. I kind of stuck with what I knew, and then later got into grunge and stuff like that. But I feel like all the really good, fantastic guitarists went to country at that point. And that's where all the lead solos were. They were still there, and there was thriving. And I didn't know that till later. But it's kind of like back in, I don't even know the year, when jazz was big. And, back in the day, and there's all these fantastic jazz guitar players, they all went to work in the country realm, and that was in maybe the 60s and 70s. And you have all these fantastic players back then that are bringing jazz sensibilities to country music. And I've seen like interviews about that, and it's really fascinating. And that's why some of those country solos are just so unbelievably good. They're not just like triads and stuff. It's all about sneaking in that jazz sort of chord soloing, neighbor tones, and all that stuff, chromaticism into those leads. That's where it came from. But anyway, I'm talking about my journey. And at that point, when grunge took over, I was like, well, what's the point? Like, everything I love about guitar just left, so that was a moment when I thought of it, quitting. But I just kept going because I love guitar. And at that point I was a teenager, and I kind of defined myself as a guitar player. I'm an artist, visual artist first. And then I kind of got into guitar, and like, that was a way that I saw myself. And if I wasn't that, what was I? Right. So I just kind of stuck with it. Went to college, ended up going for art, and dropped out of art school, and because I wanted to do music, I had to, all through high school, I was like, do I do art? Do I do music? It was never a choice to do anything as, pedestrian as work a real job, which I've worked many since then. But I was like, if I'm going to go to college and dream big, I want to do something I like to do, right? So I went to art school, dropped out, and then went to music. So that was almost a quit. I was almost like, well, forget about music. I'll go down the art route. But then I was in art school and I was like, you know what? No, I can figure out art on my own. I need help with music because I was having trouble teaching myself, So I ended up going to Berkeley, and man, a couple times there I wanted to quit or change instruments or something because, man, such fantastic players there. It's really unbelievable. It's everything you think it is. And these guys that were my age or younger seemed to understand the instrument way better than I could ever imagine. They could see it all on the neck or on whatever instrument they were playing. They could see it all there, and I thought that was wonderful. But it was very intimidating, for sure. And I feel like I was in a better position than a lot of the guitarists that went in. I feel like they just let a lot of guitarists in that first year and I don't know, I'm just talking out of my ass really, but that they let them in so that they could pad the bank account, and they know that a lot of those guitarists are going to drop out during the first year, and that happened a lot. A lot of the people I met in the first year weren't there the second year, because they were like, well, this is too much. They felt probably the same way I felt, where I was like, what am I doing here? Imposter syndrome? But I stuck it out. I was in a film scoring major. I wish I had probably done a performance major, but I had my parents' voice in the back of my head, have something to fall back on, like a real deal. And I figured writing was more, I don't know, like a real job than performing, which was more, you're just playing guitar. I don't know. Looking back, I can see why I thought that, but it doesn't make any sense to me now, So anyway, that's a moment I thought of quitting many times and do I belong here? And then just later, after I got out of school, it was hard to find a job in the industry if I didn't want to move out west. I tried moving out west. It didn't work out. That's a whole nother story. I came back, and in Boston, in the surrounding areas, I just was having trouble making anything happen, So at that point, I was working in insurance and construction and just anything I could find to kind of start paying my school loans. Tried to live as an adult, get an apartment, car, all this stuff, right? And start my life. And there was no clear career path for what I was doing. So at that point, I thought to quit, that's maybe where a lot of people are, where maybe they didn't go to school for it, but they play as a hobby when they're growing up and they stop and, life takes over and you start working, and there's just no time for it. But I would still struggle and I would play. And I always tried to keep a foot in it, in that world, teaching guitar, learning, playing in bands, whatever I could do to kind of stay engaged. For the fear of if I didn't have anything, then I'd probably just put it on the wayside. And, like I said, I still define myself as a guitar player, even then, even working insurance and stuff. I was a guitar player working in insurance or working in construction. That's just the way I saw it. So, there's other times, and it always comes down to me looking at the guitar and going like, what the hell is this? This is just a piece of wood or two with strings stretched on it that make noise, What is this? This is what I do. But I love everything about it. And I could never bring myself to quit for some of the reasons that I'll explain later, and that I'm glad I didn't quit, right? So let's get into the 5 reasons why a lot of guitar players quit. Not in any sort of order. These are just random reasons that I think that lead people to say, you know what, I'm moving on. Time to leave childish things behind, right? Which is just awful as far as music goes, because it's not childish. Art isn't childish. It's culture and it's enriching and all those words that people use and that I totally believe in. So the first reason people quit is they expect progress to feel linear, right? They expect it to be like, I do this step and then this step and then this step, and it adds up. But in most cases, it's not that way. You know, it adds up in other ways that you don't see until later. I think of it a lot like if you were stacking rocks, all right? And you put a rock, and you see those things on the beach where it's a big rock and a little rock and another rock, and you just stack them up, maybe 6 or 7 stones high, but then it will fall over, right? And then you think, well, that stinks, like all that work I just put in is gone. And, you know, they think that's it. Like you can only build in one direction. But we're stacking rocks. What really happens, and what happens, I feel like, in music and guitar and understanding things, is that pile falls over and you just keep putting rocks on it. And it just makes the base of that pile bigger and more stable. And you just keep putting rocks on, just keep showing up and put another rock on, put another rock on. And some of it will start going higher until they kind of collapse on itself again. Now your base is bigger and you just keep putting it higher. And everybody knows, like, if you just keep going and you step back, it seems like there's some fuzz in my headphones here for some reason. Hopefully that's not coming through to you guys. But if you step back, eventually you have a giant pile of rocks. It's just the way physics works and nature works. So that's something to think about when you're working. You know, maybe your pile collapsed, but now the base of the pile is bigger and more solid, and maybe your knowledge and your understanding and your capabilities on the instrument are more solid, and the foundation is there to build upon, right? So that's one reason they get discouraged. Another reason that people get discouraged is they compare themselves to others, right? They confuse comparing themselves to others to evaluation of their own skill, but it's not like that at all either, right? A lot of times when you see people online playing, it's a 30-second video that took them 8 hours to make, right? They had to play that part over and over and over and over. So don't compare yourself to that. You know, you're comparing yourself to their most labored and, you know, ideal sort of presentation, what they want you to believe, because they want to get views, right? And that's just the way social media works. But instead, maybe, what you're comparing that to is you sitting in your room trying to play the same thing over and over and messing up, which is the process, right? But you don't see their process. All you see is your process. Like every second of it, you're with yourself every second of your playing. So you see all the mistakes and you can't edit it out. So instead, look at players online for motivation or inspiration, right? And only compare yourself to yourself, your past self. What were you doing yesterday? What were you doing the day before? Where were you doing 6 months ago compared to now? And that's where you should base your worth and your ideas of your progression, your vision of how you progression. Are you progression well? Sorry, why do I want to do a podcast? I can't speak. Anyway, that's reason 2 why people mess up quite a bit. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip here of my fine coffee. Yummy. It's getting so expensive these days. You got to enjoy every sip. All right. So reason number 3 why people might quit guitar is they practice without context, without anything to apply it to, right? Like I was saying, where I tried to always keep my foot in the world, I was teaching or I was recording or playing in a band. If I didn't have that reason to show up, I would have probably stopped. I would have made, other things would have taken a priority over guitar. It's just the way it is. I would have been like, oh, I want to play this video game, or I want to watch this other movie that's coming on, or whatever. I'm going to go for a hike. Well, actually, hiking is good. I don't mind that. But Yeah. So if you can kind of ground your practice in a reason to play, like if you want to write music, write a song, every day or whatever that no one is ever going to hear, but you're writing it, or record something, record a song for yourself or for others, jam with other people. If you have a date that you're going to jam with somebody, you kind of have, a reason to practice and get better for that. Or if you're in a band and you're starting to learn tunes and you got a gig, that's a reason to play. So as long as you have a reason, it's going to make it easier. And if you're just playing because, you like to play and that's enough for you to keep showing up, that's fine if you like the process. But it'll help if you have a reason, right? It's like an athlete shooting hoops. They can enjoy the process of shooting from here and shooting from there and practicing this layup and, like all the things, the drills, practicing, dribbling, everything, all the conditioning that goes into it beforehand. They love that, but they never play a game with anybody one-on-one or on a team or whatever. It might just fall by the wayside. Oh, work was so hard today, I'm not going to go practice. Or I don't know. My friend said, he wants to get together to do nothing, just to get together. And we did it yesterday, but well, I'll go today too, or whatever. So you'll put something higher in the priority list. So if you have something to connect it to, you're better off. Plus, if that basketball player plays against one other person, they're getting to use those things that they worked on in context and get better. And that's going to help, so many ways. They're going to see how they could get better at using what they did. They're going to start cementing those neural pathways in their brain to do those moves. You know what I mean? If there's a team, now you're working on other things like teamwork and passing and plays and stuff like that. So it becomes a much richer experience when you have something to create for, right? Even if a guitarist is just recording their own stuff in their room, you're working on composition, you're working on your own taste, right? You're working on sound design, like getting your tone right, mixing all the other tones. Now you have to start thinking about, what does a drum fill sound like? What's a good drum fill for here? What would a bass player play? Like you start getting into a whole bunch of other aspects of whatever it is you're interested in this case, guitar, right? So there's another reason to practice with context, because it'll make your practice much better. Number 4, a lot of guitarists think that struggle means a lack of talent, right? I taught guitar for decades at this point. And some people, if I tell them that, I could never play guitar. I don't have any talent for that. Or I don't have any talent to draw. I can't draw. I can't do whatever. Fill in the blank. I can't do this. I don't have talent for it. And I don't know. I don't think that's an accurate statement. I don't think anybody has talent for anything right off the bat, right? A baby doesn't have talent in art, right? Or music or whatever, walking. They don't even have talent in walking. It's focused like effort that creates talent. And what is talent? Talent is a combination of skill, knowledge, and then taste, I think, right? So physical skill, with the paintbrush, with the basketball, with the guitar, knowledge of how that world works. How does harmony and music work? How does, the fundamentals of basketball work? How does color theory work, right? Those are like the skills that you learn. The knowledge. And then as you get into it, you acquire taste. Like you listen to your favorite guitar players and you start to say, I like that. I don't like that. And you just pick this stuff up along the way. I like this painting, or I like this medium to work in. I don't like that, but I like when they do it like this or whatever. Or I like this player. I like this movie does, or how he passes and whatever. I'm just going to keep going back to those three things: music, art, and basketball. So it's the combination of the skill, the knowledge, and the taste. And there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell. I'll throw it out there. I bet it's very cliche right about, at this point, but there's a book called Outliers. I love it. It was a fantastic book. Made me feel so much better about my life because, it talks about how, as an aside, it compares different people and the experiences in their lives that made it so they succeeded or failed, right? Like it was kind of almost inevitable when you look at people's history, the path that they ended up taking, right? It was kind of laid out for them. So that was an interesting part of the book. But the part I want to reference here is the part about the 10,000 hours. And you might have heard this, but this is where it comes from, Malcolm Gladwell. And it says that to become good at any sort of activity, right? Guitar, art, basketball, whatever, the person needs to have 10,000 hours or more invested in that skill, right? And it talked about Bill Gates having access to a computer at a very young age because of the school he went to, got a computer lab, and he would just be in there all the time. So he was starting to accrue those hours at a very young age. And by the time he was a young adult, he was way ahead of everybody, What talks about the Beatles, where they were just a band out of Liverpool like anybody else, just some dudes, and then they could write some tunes. But what really set them apart is they got a gig in Germany. They would play 8 to 10 hours a day, maybe more, 7 days a week. And they'd live backstage. And it was that during that time that they clocked in so much hours as a band, playing so many different tunes, that when they got back to Liverpool, they were this beast of a band that knew all this stuff. They had this whole catalog of songs in their head that they knew all these chord progressions. They knew what worked and what didn't work, and they knew how to talk to the audience. And they knew how to play their instruments. They knew what made the audience react. Like that was so much a part of them, their talent, right? It's all about accruing the hours and just putting in the time, and you're just going to see the talent develop. And then someone will say to you, wow, you're so talented. And you'll be like, when did that happen? When did I get talented? So just enjoy that. And it's a marathon, not a sprint, as I tell my students all the time. You're not going to get there right away. It's that one foot after the other for 1,000 miles, 10,000 miles, and it's going to get you there. You can't sprint that. You just got to keep showing up. Cool. So that's number 4. The number 5 one is almost like the practicing without context, but you're practicing in a vacuum, right? You have no feedback, right? Not the amp feedback, but no feedback on your playing, no community around it to keep you motivated. There's no perspective on how well you're doing, just self-judgment in your head, which, as social media has told us in psychology, is people aren't always the nicest to themselves in their head, and that's too bad because you're with yourself 100% of your life. You're that voice in your head. Or, some people say you're not, and you're just witnessing it. But you do have control of your thoughts. And, for example, if you make a mistake, do you go, oh, so stupid, what the hell am I doing? Come on, get it together, man. Or do you say, man, that's tough, man. Let's try it again. That's difficult. Is it more of a challenge or more of an opportunity to beat yourself up, And I guess everybody's different in that way. I was always pretty nice to myself in my head. I'd be like, come on, Santos, get it together or whatever. But I'm not like going to call myself names or whatever. If I mess up, I see it more as a challenge. I laugh it off. And I feel like that is a good approach. Because what's the alternative? You hate yourself and you're beating yourself up. And then you resent the guitar because it's just another opportunity to be like down on yourself, right? So that's something to think about. There's a song that I play for my kids from They Might Be Giants called Dr. Worm. And he says in the word, he's like, I'm not a real doctor. I am a real worm. I live like a worm and I like to play the drums. And he says he liked the person to come listen to him because he thinks he's getting better. But if you listen to him, he'd like some criticism and let him know if he's getting better at the drums or whatever. And I just always thought that was funny. I mean, it's a ridiculous song, but there's something very human about that where you want feedback, you want people to not rip you apart, but give you an outside perspective of how you're doing, maybe some feedback, but also encouragement that you might glean from it. So that's something to think about. One way to get a good kind of perspective on your playing is record your practice. Record all the time. And then you're going to be able to really identify errors, places where you can improve, but also like what you're doing right. What sounds good? What sounds musical? So I would highly recommend recording yourself any chance you get. So cool. So those are the 5 reasons why most people quit. And I just want to take a quick pause here. If you're enjoying these conversations, the Guitar Underground, and you want to go a little deeper with your playing, I do want to mention something I built for guitarists just like you. The Pentatonic Way membership is a place where I can help players simplify the fretboard, practice with intention, and actually apply what they've been learning to real music without overwhelm. It includes structured lessons, guided practice ideas, and a supportive community of guitarists who meet every week, all working together for the same goal, playing with more confidence and clarity. If that sounds useful to you, I'll put a link in the show notes. It's totally optional, but it's there if you want some guidance along with this podcast. So, all right. Commercial finished. I got to throw that in every time. But now we can talk about 5 reasons that guitarists shouldn't quit, that I feel. And might help you step back from that ledge, right? Of, I'm going to quit. I'm telling you, I'm going to do it. All right. Reason number 1 that you shouldn't quit. We all hit plateaus, right? But in my view, plateaus are all your skills consolidating each other and reinforcing. It's when you start getting muscle memory. It's where you are starting to really internalize what you've been learning. So maybe you haven't learned a groundbreaking thing in a while, but it doesn't mean you're not progressing. If you're playing a lot of the same stuff, your fingers are getting used to it. Your mind is locking that knowledge in and getting ready for the next big leap in your knowledge, right? And I forget who said it. I think it was John Nathan Cordy was talking about plateaus. Maybe not. I don't know. I watched so many YouTubers. But somebody was saying that, rather than see it as a bad thing, look at a plateau as like, well, this is where I get to enjoy the level I'm at, right? I've attained this level of playing. Now I can just enjoy it. You're not like a tree or whatever once it stops growing, it starts dying, right? Get busy living, get busy dying. It's not like that. You can just enjoy where you're at with the guitar for a while and just play the stuff and I don't know, like there's nothing wrong with that. You don't always have to be getting better. You can just be, and that's enough. All right. I'm here to tell you that's enough. You're good just like you are. If you want to progress, that's good too. But don't quit. The second reason why guitarists shouldn't quit is because that click, that next plateau, that next big idea is cumulative. It's not instant. It shows up over time, right? Like I notice it when I was practicing groups of 5, things like this. Those Eric Johnson-y type things. And I would be practicing with metronome during my practice sessions. And 2 or 3 months later, it would show up in my improv in a solo, and I could think of it in the moment and be like, oh, I'm going to do one of those. That would sound great here. And I would just whip it out. And, like it sneaks up. I wouldn't whip it out, but I'd whip out that technique. Anyway, it sneaks up on you. It's just not like I was practicing it. Now I can just do it in context. It takes time. It sneaks up and then you go, oh, there's that thing I was practicing, so, struggling now with things doesn't mean you'll never get them. It doesn't mean you're going to get them right now, but it will show up. Just keep doing it. Keep putting those rocks on the pile. It's going to show up. It's going to make a difference in the end when you step back and you look at this pile of rocks and you're like, I did that, And then someone comes and says, no, not there. I wanted the pile over there. Because that's life, right? Another reason is because your ears develop quicker than your hands. You hear things and you have ideas that happen, develop faster than you can actually do them, and this is normal in any sort of activity, right? Passion with the art. You see something in your mind and I want it to look like this. And you go to the canvas or whatever and you're painting, it doesn't exactly look like that. And that's fine, In one way, that's where all those happy accidents Bob Ross came up with. That's where it is. He put something down and I'd watch his show and be like, oh, he's done it now. That he can't come back from that. And, with his experience and the 10,000 hours, he's like, well, let's make that a tree or whatever. Or that's now a bush, and it would look awesome in the end, or where was I going with that? You see these moves you want to do on the basketball court. You want to be able to dribble behind your back and then through your legs and shoot. You see the professor out there doing all these street ball moves and you're like, I want to do that. You have to put in the time and earn it. You have to be able to wait for your body and the muscle memory to catch up with what you want to do. And that's just a fact. And that's part of the marathon and that's part of the fun. It would be great if we could just all download it like Neo did with karate in the Matrix, here, now I know how to play guitar. That would be cool. But, would it be as rewarding? I don't know. When AI can write a bunch of tunes in 2 seconds, 2 versions of a song that are equally as good, is it worth writing songs anymore? I don't know. I think so. I think it's the doing, right? The process of doing it that make it worthwhile. Kind of going off on a different tangent, but that's the idea, is that your taste is going to exceed your physical skills for a while. And then after time, you'll close that gap and you'll be able to do things that you have in your mind immediately or close to it. All right. Number 4, because the hardest phase comes right before you become fluent at something. This happens in music and art, everything, sports. Because when you're first starting out, and it's like being a kid, like there's so many firsts and so many like wins. You're like, oh, I can play a chord. I can do this. Now I can play this chord. And now I can strum. And now I can strum up and down. And like you're knocking down these things on the checklist so fast. And it feels great, if you stick into it and you like it. But then after a while, your goals become more nuanced, right? Like, oh, that I switched too late on that chord, or that note choice, that wasn't what I had in mind. And you're combining your theory of music with strumming patterns and recording techniques, and all these things are coming together. And at the end, they all lock in, like with music. But it's right before that last part there that you're juggling all this stuff and you're having very small wins that it becomes very frustrating. Or you'll hear a player. I remember hearing Danny Gatton for the first time, and I'm like, well, what's the point of me even playing? Or Guthrie Govan, like, these guys, they got it covered. I should just, like, what am I going to bring to the guitar that they haven't already, But then you continue and you realize that it took so many different things for them to become who they are. And that's the step right before you attain greatness. Now, I'm not there yet. I'm in that struggling stage. I don't know if anybody ever gets there. But you keep trying. That's the idea. So that's another reason you shouldn't quit, because you might be right at the precipice of attaining guitar enlightenment, guitar becoming. You're going to start glowing. You never know. And finally, because quitting resets the clock, right? Like we've all taken a couple days off and you go back to the guitar and you're like, oh man, I can't play what I was playing before, or I forget how that song goes or whatever. It doesn't, it loses the momentum and it kind of just stops the clock and you have to regain ground again, like one step forward, two steps back. Now think about quitting for months or years. And I've seen this happen with like adults I've known that have stopped playing when their kids are born. People I've taught, students that are coming back after years or a decade off and saying like, oh, I used to play. And then, my son was born, I had a family and I came back and I'm starting over again. It's so tough, And that's tough. That's a tough spot to be in, and life gets in the way. It really does. But they say time flies, but you're the pilot, right? So you can decide, I'm going to play for 5 minutes a day. I'm going to play for 10 minutes a day. You can fit that in. If you can't, then you shouldn't be watching Netflix, right? It's all about your priorities. If you make it a priority, you can practice for a couple minutes a day. I'm not here to shame anybody. I'm just trying to put some logic to it, and that's the logic that I would place onto myself. If it's a priority for me, I'll make time, even if it's a little bit of time. And like I said, keep your foot in that world, a little bit, so that you're always kind of going back there and you're not a stranger to it. So that's my advice. Don't stop because that means you stopped. Don't stop because that means you failed, right? And not that failing is bad, but if you don't quit, if you keep showing up for 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a week, or, at least you're still doing it. You haven't given up. You're still doing it. And above all, just enjoy it. It's just music, right? It's just art. There's no wrong answers. There's no wrong playing. There's just what you play. And if you like it, that's all that matters. So I hope some of these things rang true to you. I hope that if you were thinking of quitting, maybe now you're rethinking not quitting, as I think that would be good. And have you ever quit? I'd like to know. So anything you want to share with me, put it down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, and I try to get back to every comment that I get. And that's about it for today. I'm Neil Santos, Guitar Underground, and I will talk to you next episode. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.